Hey, welcome to your weekly Cornish Späti. It's me, Kieran, and I'm joined by Uma.
Hi.
And we're talking Spain, Uma's favorite country.
Woo!
Defund Spain.
Yeah, defund Spain. Yes, please. Oh my god. Yeah, elections.
They did it. In a little bit, we'll cut to an interview I had with Eoghan Gilmartin from Sobremesa.
Sobremesa.
Yeah, that thing I said.
Hey, you were close enough. I'll give you
That
that.
is close enough. I could do that. As soon as Spain starts to put vowels together, I'm just like, no, I'm out. Fuck it.
You did it a bit of like, you know how? Well, I don't know if you know, but Latinos laugh at us for like using a lot, like
Oh, the prince, someone's prince lisp or something, isn't there? Was like a
yeah.
Go on.
And you kind of did the sobremesa instead of sobremesa.
Ah, interesting. Okay, all right.
So you're fully Spanish now.
That makes sense with my exactly zero experience with South or Central America. 100%. Yeah, no. I okay. Yeah, right. So the elections. Yeah, big exalted sigh.
Big sigh.
All right, yeah. So we can talk about this a little bit. We can do like the plain election results. Oh, excuse me. So it was let me just get these up because basically we had polling for ages that the right wing was going to win. Very handily. They were going to get like an outright majority. I think a lot of polling was saying that.
Yeah. A lot was just straight up saying that Pepe would get majority, most likely with Vox as well.
Yes. So even that was like a fun thing to think about for a bit.
Yeah, it was terrifying, and it was a source of many debates on Twitter because there's many people especially also in Catalonia, that don't vote. They refuse to vote. So it was just the discourse every day on Twitter was just like, people that do vote telling people that don't vote, like, just go vote because Pepe and Vox are going to win. And then the others being like, fuck you, it's not going to be my fault if they win. And like that, it was just exhausting.
And then Uma was just like, I don't know what any of you people are saying. No habla en español.
Exactly.
I speak English for these couple of months. No one notices me. Yeah, that sounds fun. I hate that discourse. That discourse happens all the time.
Yeah.
My favorite thing is when like you get people who are just like, I'm not voting discourse, and then they're just like on the day, just like, I'll just go vote. I don't really care.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I had to vote through post.
Yeah, fair enough.
And thankfully I was there like a couple of weeks before the election, so I could actually I went to my post up. It was so easy. Like, honestly, the post in Spain was so great. Everyone was talking shit about them because they just needed time to send all the votes, because a record number of people, like millions of people, actually asked to vote through the post because a lot of people were on holidays. Right, that was the whole thing of like, oh my god, like Pedro Sanchez asked for, he's making us vote in the middle of the summer.
Hitler for doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's his fascist strategy of like, I don't know, Sanchismo. Ridiculous. But and then the Post delivered basically like all of them, and the ones that they didn't deliver is simply because the person wasn't home when like the postman or woman went, because I was home obviously when the post came with the vote, and it's a guy that has literally been our postman for years. He knows me, knows my family, and he was still like, I need to see your ID. I'm sorry, I know who you are, but
this whole thing,
just just in case they ask, I have to ask for your ID. And I was like, you know what? That's good. That's great that you're asking anyway.
All right, so we can talk a little bit about the results because we got PP. Funnier when
Yes.
I say it. They actually won the most seats, but they got 137 seats. You need 176 for a majority. Coming in second, we have the PSOE, Pedro Sanchez, with 121 seats. Then we have Vox with 33, which means Vox and PP can't work together to make a majority. And then you have Sumar with 31. And then we have the only other two worth kind of really mentioning is ERC with 7 and the Junts, as I now know they're pronounced, also with 7. And then at that point, there's like a million tiny different parties that all got like 1 or 2 seats, and it's whatever.
Yeah, Bill, like the Basque one, like the Sinn Féin of the Basque County got like 2, I think, or 1.
Sinn Féin just spelled with more X's.
Exactly.
Yeah. They naturally, yeah. Then you get into like regional parties and stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's also this whole thing of like a lot of these parties are coalitions of various other parties.
Yeah.
You can look at some graphs later in your own time podcast to see how these all work. So yeah, okay, but the interesting thing about this election is when Pedro Sanchez called it, everyone was like, "The fuck are you doing? This is the dumbest thing you've ever done." And then he's kind of come out of it relatively well, not losing as bad as people thought he was going to do.
Yeah,
preventing the PP and Vox from having their own like coalition. Because the only other parties you can work with are the regional parties who all hate like people trying to rewarm Francoism in the microwave. So naturally enough, it's kind of, I think it's basically assumed now that it's going to be effectively a return of the old coalition, just with like Podemos changed its name to Samar, and we have like more dependence on the regional parties.
Yeah, that's the main problem. But also, let me just say that when Sanchez called the elections, because PSOE did horribly in like the
elections,
the regional elections. If he hadn't called elections, Pepe and Vox would have like fucking started a coup d'état. Like they would have been like, no, because they were saying, look how badly PSOE did. Look how well we did.
Yeah.
So, of course, Sanchez just called for elections. And then they were complaining. It's like, dude, like, you don't want PSOE to be in government. So why are you complaining? Just like work for your votes. And also Vox lost like 20 seats or something like that. Almost half.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding is that's like a hiccup of your of the great system you have over there that punishes small parties, though, because like, what is it? The percentage of the vote they got last time was 15%, and now it's like 12%. It's like it's a 3% drop that has resulted in like nearly halving of their seats.
Oh well, boo-hoo.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. Yeah.
But yes, now it if there's a government, because I'm not even sure if there will reach any consensus, if there will probably be more elections this year. If they agree, it will have to be with the regional parties, specifically, which is very difficult for them, the Catan pro-independence parties.
Yeah.
Specifically, Junts.
And even more specifically, one guy from Junts. He doesn't even live in Spain anymore.
The Waterloo guy. Yeah, exactly. Like that's... Listen, I don't like Junts at all.
Sure.
Like someone asked me after the elections, like, because I guess they trust my political... I don't know, compass or whatever. And they were like, oh, what do we think about Junts? And it's like, no, what do we think about Carles Puigdemont?
Specifically, yeah.
Specifically. And I was like, well, he sucks. but I kind of like respect him because he did the whole referendum. And it was really funny how he evaded getting arrested by the Spanish police. Like, I don't know if you know the story, right?
I do, yeah. Tell for the listeners, though. Go for it.
He basically, they were chasing him with like a helicopter, and he was in a car,
Yeah.
and he changed cars under a tunnel. And obviously the helicopter couldn't see, and then the helicopter kept following like the wrong car instead of thinking, oh, maybe they just did a, you know.
It's some fucking GTA shit.
Yeah, it's like the stupidest thing ever, and they still couldn't figure out that, he escaped.
And then Carlos crossed into the Pyrenees, took a tank, and did that thing where you can fire the tank backwards to make the tank fly.
Exactly.
Made it all the way to Brussels.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. There was a time there also where like there was a period after that happened where everyone did not know where he was.
Oh yeah, that was crazy. Like honestly, I don't know, he must have a lot of contacts in Europe because he was like 100% a fugitive. Nobody knew what he was, and then when they discovered it, it was just every country started being like, "Oh, we'll send you back to Spain." Whatever. Now he's in Waterloo. I think he was elected to the European Parliament, actually.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So yeah, Junts in general just sucks. They're right wing. They're conservative. Because that's the problem with the pro-independence movement, pro-Catalan independence movement, is that sadly you can find any kind of people in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a consequence of, unlike a handful of other regions that vie for separatism, Catalonia is like the richest part of it. So there really is this right-wing case for independence of what if we take our ball and ran with it kind of thing.
Yeah, which doesn't mean, because I have seen tweets on my timeline from mutuals I really respect and I think are very smart. But when it comes to Catalan independence, it's like everyone is, I don't know, brain rot. It's like, no, because it is true that you can, there's people like the people in Junts, there's worse people even that support Catalan independence, but that doesn't mean it's like a bourgeois movement. Like,
yeah. There's a good take for there's just because there's a bad take doesn't mean there's a good take for
exactly
that.
Like most of the activism and everything that is pro Catalan independence is like very, very leftist, very anti-fascist, very much like completely different than what people say it is.
And there's an incredibly violent history of repression that is incredibly recent, and you can understand why people are sour about staying in the same country. My favorite thing of like one of the things that I often hear from, it's usually on the Scottish independence side of like we need socialists in Scotland and the UK to work together kind of thing. I was like, sure, yeah, I get this idea and that's great. I'd love that for that to happen, but it's like there really isn't any reason why that couldn't happen post independence. Like you could still work together. Like you could, like independent Catalonia and independent like Basque Country could make like you can make the Nordic League equivalent, but for like Iberia, and just be like, yeah, we can just work together, but we have our own government now. Go away.
Yeah, I mean, ERC, ERC, and Bildu, which is the Sinn Féin of the Basque Country, they did meetings together. I think they did like events together in the Basque Country and stuff, and it's like they mostly always stick together as well. They are very, very.
I mean,
similar.
My understanding is there's a handful of like people within Catalonian politics who kind of like advocate for being as independent as the Basque Country, because the Basque Country has the most like autonomy.
Yeah, because of some things from like the medieval times or something like that.
So anyway, going back to this, I do want to talk about some of the wilder things that happened this election, or like
go on.
the memes. The memes. I want to talk about thing I'm not going to pronounce correctly. Pero Sanche.
You said it pretty well.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's more the perro because it's like dog. Pero Sánchez, yeah. Perro Sánchez.
Hell yeah. So what's going on here? Is Pedro Sanchez based now? Is this what we're...
So I think it started as that's how the right wing called him.
Yeah, because this is where, like Franchismo comes from, right?
Yeah. Like perro is like dog, right? So like they were making fun of him, saying he's a dog, whatever. And it started specifically during the lockdown because the lockdown was so harsh. And
I've seen the fucked Facebook memes of like Big Brother style posters, but with his face instead of.
Yeah. Like. Honestly, not to defend Pedro Sanchez, but like, my God, half of Spain would have died if Pepe had been in power during lockdown. Like you can just see how Madrid was during lockdown with the pandemic. Like so many people died because Ayuso, who is the president of Madrid, is from Pepe.
Well, we'll get to that later. I want to talk about that too.
Yeah. But yeah, so they started calling him Perro Sanchez, and then the left just started like the non-right wing people started taking it like as a joke, and started making their own memes with that. And I assume he is a really good community manager or social media manager that is like on top of all of this because he just appropriated it as well.
Yeah.
And then started making jokes about it, called himself Perro Sanchez, went on like a podcast that is very famous between like young people and talked about that and made fun of it. And the funniest thing is that in the last event they did, his wife had a massive pin that said, "I love Perro Sanchez."
All right. So and I've heard this compared to like Dark Brandon. This is like in America.
Yeah. It's basically that, but I think kind of less cringe. I don't know if it's because I'm weirdly protective of Pedro Sanchez, even though I don't really like him that much.
Well, I think I cards at the table. He's hotter than Joseph Biden. That's my. He's a young, spry man in comparison to Joseph Biden.
Yeah, he's a charming person, even if you don't like him.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's also leads us to the next great meme or theme of memes is being horny for Pedro Sanchez.
Okay, yeah, that was horrible. That was very cringe. It was, oh my God, the Galician one, calling him bizcochito, so like little cake, and like, oh, it was so embarrassing. It was so horny for Pedro Sanchez. And like, yeah, I don't know. I don't. Is he used to people sexualizing him? What's the deal there? Because they also gave condoms with like his face on it. It's just so embarrassing.
Yeah. Weird. That's so weird. That's like every stereotype like Northern Europe has of Southern Europe is you're all horny.
Oh yeah. And I mean, did you know when he was elected in 2019, all of Twitter discovered the president of Spain, and all of Twitter was just horny for Pedro Sanchez.
Yeah. It reminded me of like when Trudeau was elected.
Yeah, exactly.
Earlier photos came out. The Galician one was great. It was like, oh, Senor Sanchez, what a lovely packet of.
Oh God, yeah.
You have, yeah.
I do respect that it was in Galician, though. I will give them that.
I love this concept of just like, you can say the most heinous dog shit to me, but if you say it in a minority language in the Iberian Peninsula, I love it.
Exactly. Yeah, that is my point. That's my politics.
We're going to institute a flat tax. He's like, yeah, but he said flat tax in a very particular way. Oh, God damn it. The next one, which is to do with Samar, actually, is...
the dog thingy, right?
The weird dog TikTok thing.
I don't know. They definitely had a Gen Z community manager.
Did they though? Because I shared this around one of them.
Okay.
There's one where, again, this is related to actually what I think was, a good idea by Pedro to actually to call the elections now, because they did shit in these regional elections. And the
Mm-hmm.
context of this whole campaign for a national election was like you'd get news stories of like, oh, Vox has formed a government in like Valencia or something like that. And that's like that was adding to his campaign of like, I'm the only thing that can stop like get in the way of a Vox government.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you have an actual news story in the backgrounds of like, oh, they're forming all these local governments, I think that worked, right? That worked for them.
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially because Pepe was very comfortable. Yeah, like making
Mm,
governments with books, and they started doing insane shit. Like they banned um, a theater like a representation of Orlando by Virginia Bloom. No,
mm.
Virginia Bloom. Virginia. What's her name? Wait.
I couldn't tell you. The one I heard about,
Woolf. Oh my God, Bloom.
Virginia
What
Woolf.
the
Yes, yeah,
fuck?
okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but Virginia Woolf, because Orlando is like this gender fluid character
Mm,
slash trans character, so they banned that
cool.
just
The,
because.
the one I heard was that they banned a summer screening, like open air screening of the Disney Buzz Lightyear film.
Because there's one lesbian couple, or
Yeah,
no?
presumably, yeah. Like a Disney's idea of a lesbian couple, which is just
Yeah, exactly.
two girls who stare at each other for a bit.
Yeah, like insane shit like that. And a lot of people, like for example, even my uncle, who is, well off and more because he is well off, he's
yeah.
conservative. Even him, he was like saying, this is insane. Like everybody vote PSOE because, this is just insane. Like,
Yeah, I mean that was to kind of something that was said in the interview of like Vox getting a little too online alt-right, not realizing that like they're maybe in this echo chamber of people who care about this stuff, but actually this doesn't play very well nationally.
mm-hmm.
But anyway, this is all to say that in reference to all of this, there is a TikTok video from the Samar official account where they show this, where the weird little cat people with the circular mouths are enjoying ice cream, and then uh, um, a representation of Santiago Abascal as like a Wojak character
Oh my
take,
God.
takes down the rainbow flag in front of the like local government house and
Mm-hmm.
replaces it with like a Spanish flag, and the cats kick him out and put the rainbow flag back up. So it's both the Spanish flag and the rainbow flag. See, you can have both. We can talk about that later and the implications. But I shared this around in like, or no, sorry, I didn't. But our lovely Spanish listeners were sharing this in the Discord
Mm-hmm.
of Corner Späti, and we're like, someone was like, "Wait, why did they depict the opposition as the Chad meme? Because they'd done Abascal as like Chad, as like the Chad guy, but wearing a Vox t-shirt and has the correct facial hair and stuff like that. It's just like,
So it's not Gen Z
no,
who did the meme. They don't know.
I don't know. I think it's someone who's trying to be. I don't understand.
Well,
I think is more accurate though, and what happens
yeah.
to a lot of political parties is they get someone in their office who is technically Gen Z, but doesn't know how to do this stuff actually, because they spent their childhood being in a political party.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It's that kind of Gen Z people.
Yeah. So it's not. I'm not like. For example, you don't upload to TikTok. You're Gen Z, Uma. Like,
True.
but
I, I
imagine you're in the office. And everyone's like,
yeah.
you know how to use TikTok.
Yeah, true. I am like the youngest in my office. I think they would just be like pointing at me, like you know.
Do a TikTok dance right now.
Yeah, exactly. God, no. Yeah, that's true. I don't have TikTok. But surely I know that the chat thing is a good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know that much.
Exactly. I am that educated.
Oh, okay. Before we got to the interview, though, I do want to talk about one thing, which is like
Mm-hmm.
regional differences in Spain, because it seems like it's a big deal, and
Mm-hmm.
not just the obvious ones of like the Basque Country and Catalonia, but the one that I find very interesting and I think is quite different for the rest of Europe or like even the Western world is Madrid as actually a conservative stronghold rather than like
Stop it. I was so pissed off watching No, because I was also working that day. So I literally had to not miss a single second of the elections and the count. And you know the Trump being like, stop the count. So that was me when they started counting Madrid. I was like,
nope.
you motherfuckers. Like, PSOE was winning
Mm,
or was doing better
yeah,
until fucking they started like counting Madrid. And I was like, yeah, fuck
yeah,
this.
yeah,
Like, we're done here.
yeah. Because they have what is it, Ayuso in charge of?
Ayuso, yeah.
Yeah.
Which it was very awkward because even though they didn't get like the majority, they did win technically the elections, right, Pepe?
Mm-hmm.
So they still went out, like they put the stage in front of their HQ, and they still went out. And when Feijóo, who is the president of Pepe and the leader of the opposition, started talking, Ayuso was like standing near him, and the people started chanting Ayuso, Ayuso, Ayuso while Feijóo was speaking, and
Yeah,
she just like tried to look all like
yeah,
coy and shy and whatever. It's
yeah.
like,
I love
yeah,
this, but I also don't.
yeah, she's literally gonna stab Feijóo in the back at like
It's so
what.
easy now. He fucked up.
Oh yeah, no, and now he's like being like, please, PSOE, don't let me do a government,
Yeah.
don't do pacts with like the Catalan
I'm
people.
not friends with that smuggler anymore.
Exactly, the fucking. Oh my god, did you see that in an interview? He was like, I don't know why that photo exists. I didn't know that he was a drug dealer. It's like,
Hmm.
you were a politician in Galicia. Of course you knew. Like, come on.
Either you're saying you're either lying or you're terrible at governance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also it was very funny because when they started counting the votes in Madrid, on Twitter, the thing that was trending in Spain was "Bomb Madrid." It's like we all experience this, feeling of unity against Madrid.
I appreciate that. I have seen a handful of like just normal conversations on social media during the election time. Someone just being like, just innocently saying like, "Oh, I'm in Madrid at the moment," and then people underneath responding, "I'm so sorry."
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, Madrid is just like I saw. I had to see a video of Feijóo voting in like his polling station,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
and the people around started chanting "President, President, President." And I was like, "Oh, lovely!
It's nice.
How nice!"
It's very strange. I guess it's just like, so we saw those charts of like the poverty. It's basically like the poverty of regions mapped to like where political support is, and like the richer your region, the richer your like little electoral district, the more likely you are to vote PP. The poorer, more likely to vote PSOE with
Sumar.
Vox. Yeah, Samara there as well. Vox obviously leaning towards the rich again. I guess is that just all in Madrid then? Is that just like what it is? It's just like wealthier people are in Madrid.
Yeah. Yes and no, because I mean, in the same city of Madrid, if you see like after the elections, they always publish these maps so you can see literally street by street who voted what,
Oh, fun, yeah.
which
Okay.
is a bit citizen No, it's Big Brother, but whatever. But it's interesting. Obviously, they don't put the names of the people, but like even in the city of Madrid, you can see clearly which are the richer neighborhoods and which are the poorer ones, because the poorer ones vote PSOE, even though they're in Madrid, and the richer ones vote PP. It's like in Barcelona. I don't know if I think I posted it on my Instagram story and my close friends. Like Barcelona, it's very clearly divided by Avenida Diagonal, which is this avenue that just like cuts the city in two parts. And we do say in Barcelona that the people that are like upper Diagonal are very rich and very right wing. And in the map of Barcelona, you could just see where the Diagonal was, because from there up, everything was blue.
Yeah. Fair enough.
It's just like, come on.
Just don't be a stereotype. Just, zig when everyone zags. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, in general, of course, there's a lot of rich people in Madrid because it is the capital. It is where a lot of HQs are, a lot of like companies are. But still, the poor people of Madrid, or the more middle class people of Madrid, thankfully still vote PSOE. It's just that there's more rich people, apparently.
Yeah, that's where they are.
Yeah.
They're not an extra Madura or whatever the fuck.
Exactly, yeah.
All right. And with that, I think we will cut to our interview with Eoghan Gilmartin, journalist and podcaster. Take it away, me from 4 hours ago. All right. Hey, and we're now joined by podcaster and journalist Eoghan Gilmartin, based there in Spain, to talk about the Spanish elections and what's going on down there. Thank you for joining us, Eoghan.
Hey, Kieran. Great to be with you.
Excellent. Right. So, okay. First question. What was Sanchez thinking? Like, why were these elections called, I guess, is the it worked out for him, but what was...
It did. Well, that's the thing. It did work out in the end, didn't it? So, I mean, I think that's... I think there were elections scheduled for December. So there was going to be elections this year, probably November, December this year. And the left suffered heavy losses in the local and regional elections in May. And I think his thinking was he was going to face a backlash from his own party. He was going to face 6 months of negative headlines, of like rumors, like, the left's slow decline. For him, it was just better to go now, in a moment when, particularly because the right were negotiating regional and local coalitions. And so Vox was entering city halls, were entering regional governments, and the policies that the sort of policy concessions they were getting out of the PP were the centre-right PP were quite alarming for a lot of people. I mean, some of them were ridiculous, the sort of banning of certain materials. Most city halls run sort of summer cinemas across Spain, sort of outdoor cinemas. And Vox have targeted, the far right Vox party have targeted, very particular portfolios. So like they tend to want culture, agriculture, security, etc. So they want to be in charge of the police. They want to be in charge of culture, things they can sort of use for culture war and ideological polarization. So there was these negotiations in which, basically, for example, the Valencia regional government, basically, their sort of program for government, this is the third largest region in Spain, didn't mention gender violence, but only talked about sort of interfamily violence. They talked about getting rid of historical memory, of various policies around this. At the same time, at a local level, they were banning films from these summer cinemas, films like Buzz Lightyear, because there's, I think, a gay kiss in that or something. So, and I think it's like, I haven't seen it, so I can't actually say, but like, something ridiculous. Like there's a scene where two women kiss in it or something, but like, yeah.
Yeah, it's still Disney at the end of the day.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly. It's you're talking about Disney level like sort of content. So I think this was all happening. This was all happening sort of the month leading up to the election, and in a sense that also had a huge impact. So I think people were very surprised when Sanchez called these elections in in May, at the end of May, 12, I think it was like sort of 12 hours after the polls closed in the local elections. And people were sort of divided. Was this, he tends to be this politician who's very careful with uncertainty, or he feels okay with uncertainty. He'll take risks. He's a politician known for these sort of audacious sort of tactical maneuvers, etc. And I think people were divided about whether this was another sort of quote unquote brilliant tactical move or whether it was sort of political suicide. In the end, he seems to have judged it correctly. Now he's like the favorite to make, to lead the next government. So I think in that sense, I think it was a shock. Nobody was expecting it. It ruined basically every journalist in Madrid. It sort of ruined their holiday plans, etc. But in the end, it sort of worked out.
Yeah. Because this kind of like want to call like take or analysis that like the forming of regional governments after the regional elections was something that sufficiently like scared voters, or like really fed into the Sanchez narrative of like the anti-fascist front against Vox.
Yeah.
This is an opinion and analysis I'm seeing now, but it kind of seems like when the actual elections were called, I didn't see that opinion back then. Is that fair to say, or is this something lost in translation?
I think it's probably something lost in translation. I mean, I think, he won. We can talk about this as well, but like he won the 2019 election on a clear anti-fascist campaign strategy. Yeah. And I think that was much more, straightforward, negative anti-fascist strategy. I think this time he could also point to certain gains which were possibly being put in doubt around, they've been in government for 4 years. This is going to be like the alternative was quite a hard right government of the PP and Vox. Yeah. But no, I think he positioned himself straight away as, look, the choice is my brand of moderate social democracy or a hard right government, including post-fascist Vox. And I think that was pretty obvious from the start. I don't know, like a lot, some of the English media coverage might have lost that. I mean, I have been sort of asked by various people, like, what was he thinking? But I think that was it, and the gamble paid off. I mean, in a sense, we had this huge mobilization of the left vote, which came out to sort of protect itself against this, the threat of Vox. So no, I mean, I think it was intended, and it worked out.
Okay, fair enough. Because the kind of like analysis over here or overseas, I guess this is like broadly speaking international media looking inwards, which from doing Corner Späti I know is like very problematic is the wrong word. I make it sound like they're getting cancelled, but it's always very surface level. Did kind of the only analysis that I saw that seemed plausible was like the left, including PSOE, was on a downward trend, and it's better to do it now rather than later to let that trend continue. That was the best.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is. He is. He's a very intelligent politician. I think as a political operator, he's not his brand of sort of social democracy light isn't my politics, but I think you have to respect and acknowledge his skill as a political operator, and I think probably whatever outcome it was probably going to be the best possible in that sense. That like I think there was no point waiting 6 months in the sense, you would have had further demobilization. Go now in the worst case scenario, because the other sort of factor here was the fact that the radical left, the alternative left, was in chaos and divided, and I think this was also the right moment, I guess, for him to position the Socialist Party, the PSOE, as the sort of tactical vote. Anyone who wants to stop Vox and have the new Sumar radical left platform as a sort of very much as the junior partner. I mean, they spent the first 2 or 3 weeks of the campaign trying to put together a united electoral list. When it happened, there was a huge fallout around that, around the fact that there was a veto against Spain's current equality minister, and Podemos as number 2, Irene Montero. So the first, I mean, we're talking like the first 3 or 4 weeks of the sort of pre-campaign, I guess, were lost for the left. And so I think in the worst case scenario for Sanchez, he was going to improve or maintain his party's vote share, and then go into opposition, or this was the best. This was the moment with the highest possibility to actually get a second government.
Okay, fair enough. Right, and then I guess I should talk about a little bit about these kind of individual campaigns. I think we've talked a little bit about like what Sanchez and PSOE were doing. I'm kind of curious about the outside of the kind of like anti-Vox, anti-fascism angle. Was there anything else to Sanchez's campaign, or was that it, or was that most of it?
It was. I mean, I think the other thing he had to do was push back, I guess, against the right wing smears. I mean, I think one of the terms. I mean, the Conservative Popular Party were framing this election as a straight up choice between Sanchismo or España, like Spain or Sanchismo, and so he was being positioned as in bed with the enemies of Spain, i.e. the Catalan and Basque nationalists. Above all, Bildu, which is, I guess, the equivalent, how it would be similar to, I guess, sort of Sinn Féin in Ireland, would have historic links with the paramilitaries in the Basque Country, ETA, etc. And so, I mean, I think the idea was his coalition, he was being portrayed as this sort of power-hungry, quasi-Chavez-esque figure who was only interested in staying in power and willing to be maintained in power by sort of anti-constitutional forces, i.e. the Basques and the Catalans. And I think he went on to sort of a series of right-wing talk shows and current affairs shows and pushed back against that narrative. And I think he did that quite successfully. I mean, I think this also has to be seen in the context of the right campaign and the fact that they then went on the offensive against the Pepe's candidate, who has a lot of links with the with a well-known drug.
Was
drug. No, it wasn't him. Dorado, exactly. Yeah, Dorado, exactly. Yeah. Dorado. A well-known narco trafficante. What would you say? Drug trafficker in Galicia. And he was close friends with them well into his 30s. So I think this was the question. I mean, he had a disastrous last week at the campaign where he said, I thought he was a smuggler, not a drug trafficker, which I'm not sure if that makes it that much better. But anyway, it was, and then sort of all the memes were saying, well, smuggler of what? What was being smuggled in Galicia at that moment? It was huge quantities of Colombian cocaine.
Smuggling in Spanish unity. That's what he was doing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I think Sanchez managed to diffuse some of the sort of demonization, the sort of caricature of him as this sort of, this sort of autocratic figure.
I remember I do remember the kind of like right-wing memes going around Spanish Facebook during the pandemic of like the Big Brother style posters with Sanchez's face instead of like, there was some weird stuff going around for sure.
I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, whatever you think of him and his politics, I mean, he's a very, very mild pro-European, whatever, like mainstream politician who, I mean, there are massive issues around the Spanish police, etc. But we can talk about, for example, the sort of his hardline policies on border control and migration, etc. But the stuff they were accusing of him, was just crazy. So I think that was successful, and then it was the sort of implosion of the right wing campaign. The fact that they underestimated the impact that Vox's, of their deals they were doing with Vox, the impact that was having. And I think, a small number of swing voters, but enough to make a bit of a difference. So you had this sort of, I think, a certain demobilization of the center and then at the same time a huge surge on the left, and I think that was what really was decisive. At the same time, I think probably the key to the whole election was Catalonia, and a majority of Catalan voters came out to vote for the two current coalition parties, PSOE and Sumar, right. And you had this quite heavy fall in the pro independence vote, a certain level of abstention, but I think in the majority of the losses for the independence vote they moved to the socialists, they moved to Sumar, and so without this sort of huge progressive vote in Catalonia, we would have had an absolute majority of the right in Spain. So I think that probably was what marked the difference.
Yeah, like I've seen the maps where the kind of like level of support by PP per like county and stuff, and then you can just like actually see the border of Catalonia as a region, effectively, as well as the Basque Country. Yes. Which makes sense. This isn't new. Those regions don't like the PP.
I mean, it also points, I guess, if we talk about the rights campaigns, really, is the fact that, I guess, the rise of the far right in Spain and right wing populism in general in Spain has centered on the internal enemies, the enemies within, as opposed to like external threats, i.e., migration or whatever. And so, when you label two very significant regions in Spain, Catalonia and the Basque Country, as basically anti-Spanish, as a threat to the national unity, a threat to the constitutional order, I mean, you have to expect a backlash. And I think it is a problem where Ayuso can play an the Madrid regional government, sort of Trumpian regional president in Madrid, Isabel Díaz Ayuso. She can play a sort of anti-Catalan card in the capital in Madrid and get away with it. Yeah. But it's not. It's not an electoral strategy which works at a national level, because Spain is such a diverse country, and if the right cannot recognize the sort of plurinational nature of Spain, it's very hard for it to win an election. Yeah. Above all, because Vox is, I think in this election, Vox mobilized, it had a greater effect in terms of mobilizing the left than it did in bringing extra votes to the right.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I guess this kind of leads me to talking a bit more about Partido Popular. I'm going to have a lot of fun saying Spanish words and names incorrect.
Yeah. Well, my problem is with the Galicia, Feijóo. I presume it's correct, but it's like, and the Catalan names as well, I always struggle with.
I remember when we first had Uma on before, was a co-host. We had her on to talk about the riots in Barcelona around the arrest of Pablo, I believe, the rapper.
Pablo Asal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that was one of the things I was very surprised by, and just maybe hit a core to my Irish sense of just like, he's called Pablo in the rest of Spain, but his name is Pau, and I was like, what? No, don't do that.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I guess that kind of leads back to around to what you're saying about the plural national nature of Spain, the kind of like multinational country within the country, which is, I think, super fascinating for the international audience, because it's something that I think an international audience isn't very familiar with or doesn't understand the dynamics too well. I think the closest you really get into anywhere else in the West is possibly like the UK, and they're also not handling it very well. But also the history of like England's relationship to Scotland is a far chiller one compared to like Castilian Spanish relationship to Catalonia. With the like.
Well, I always say we're always talking about different. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Northern Ireland is probably the clearest example. No, of like of just more or less an illegitimate whatever way you want to describe it, occupation, whatever. Whereas, I mean, it's true that particularly given Spanish history in the 20th century, I mean, there's the sense, particularly with the dictatorship, but even before that, yeah, I mean, it is a different relationship. In Scotland, yeah, as you were saying, when you think the British Labour Party, etc., was founded in Scotland, you had those type of sort of
Yeah.
institutional links, etc., which helped sort of integrate, I guess.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because there's not, like I said, there's not much like international comparisons. Northern Ireland is probably the best one, but there isn't like there isn't a
Well, no,
like
see, but Northern Ireland goes for. I mean, it's not. I mean, yeah, no, I think even just because one of the other things is the fact that the Basque Country and Catalonia are the two richest, historically, the two
yeah
richest areas in Spain as well. So the idea, I mean, it's a difficult one because I think sometimes I can see also why Spanish people want to push back against the sort of trope of the oppressed Catalan people, because at the same time, go to Andalusia. I mean,
yeah
it's there are issues here, and that's not to downplay the sort of the
of course
civil
not.
rights abuses, etc. And but it's maybe to complicate it a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely does. And what I was saying is like, unlike Ireland, for example, there isn't like an independent version of Catalonia that kind of serves as this other pole. There is no equivalent of the Republic of Ireland for Catalonia. So that's all to say that what is the strategy going forward? Because hearing yourself and your co-host over in Supremisa talk about this, as well as people you had on for your election episode, it kind of seems like one of the takeaways that I kind of interpreted was Spain, by and large, is now kind of okay with the idea of like Catalonia and Basque roughly, like broadly existing as like independent identities within Spain. Like maybe they'll be a bit anti-independence, but they're kind of like, I'm not really going for this Vox like anti-Catalonia, anti-Basque thing. If I live in the middle of like Andalusia, why should I care?
Yeah, I mean, as on our election episode, we had a guest on, Carlos Del Close, who said, Spain is a country without a political majority. And I think that's the correct way to read these results. And, we're talking about a country which has had 5 general elections in 7.5 years and potentially a 6th by Christmas. And I think the question above all of Catalan self-determination, etc., has been a very polarizing issue. As I said before, I think, the rise of the far right in Spain has been around this issue above all. And, I would put, for example, migration, maybe 4th. It's really, that's not to say there isn't issues around racism in Spain, but it is to say that in terms of like actual lines of mobilization, it has been the threat to national unity from sort of these internal movements. It has been anti-left sentiment around the coalition and anti-feminist sentiment around some of the new legislation that's come in. And they've been the sort of lines around which Vox have been able to, win support and, sort of gain a pretty solid electoral base of about, well, this time about, was it like 11, 12%. And so there is, I would say, because when we talk, I mean, that's the thing, when we talk, obviously, it's very hard to talk about Spain as such, because what we have are these two polarized blocks. And for one block, questions of national, i.e. the right block, questions of national unity matter a lot. And they are, that's, the other slogan from part of the right was que te vote Chapote, which is like, Chapote was an ex-Basque, an ex-ETA commander who's now serving various life sentences for terrorist-related offences. And it is the idea that, you are, in a sense, the centre-left becomes an illegitimate force because of your alliances with these parties. So I think it is true, and I think this is what we were saying on Sobre Mesa, was that maybe one of the big concerns for the Socialist Party was that these alliances and these deals that Sanchez has done with, above all, with the Catalans in the last 4 years would hurt him in places like Andalusia and in the south, where you would have a stronger sort of Spanish nationalist sentiment, and that that you would find sort of older socialist voters who just couldn't accept these type of agreements. I mean, there was two during the last 4 years. I mean, it was he had a very shaky parliamentary majority based, to pass budgets, etc. He had to do deals with Esquerra Republicana, the centre left pro independence Catalan force, and they did compared to where Sanchez and the PSOE was 4 years ago, he did extract. Esquerra Republicana did extract quite large concessions around pardons for their leaders who had been jailed around the independence movement, and a change in the law around offences to do with this. And so you had, I think a lot of people in the Socialist Party had been worried that would cost them at the polls. And at the end of the day, fear of Vox was greater than anger towards cooperation with Catalonia and the Basque Country. And I think it's not so much that they necessarily have been neutralized, but it's at the end of the day, there was more people felt more uncomfortable around the possibility of Vox entering cabinet than they were about sort of Basque and Catalan nationalists winning concessions. I mean, there is a question: how far will that go? Obviously, when we get onto the results, we can talk about the even more complicated majority he has now, which basically depends on, Carl Puigdemont in Brussels, in exile in Brussels, yes, and what further concessions he will have to give towards that agenda. But yeah, I mean, I think it is true that Sanchez probably feels vindicated in terms of moving towards both in terms of his own result in Catalonia, that the Catalan Socialists, by far the largest party. Sumar were the second party. I mean, the two coalition parties were the largest parties who were voted for in Catalonia. At the same time, that didn't seem to have negative effects in the rest of Spain. So right. Yeah, I think it's he would feel vindicated in that sense.
So yeah, I guess the kind of the thing I'm thinking about is, what does the strategy for the PP have to be? Like, are we kind of suggesting that the PP needs to distance itself from the kind of like Vox, like post-Francoism, or like reheated Francoism of Spanish unity, and that means everyone speaks Castilian Spanish, everyone recognizes like the Madrid government above all else. Do they distance themselves from that, and do we get like a PP in the future that looks for a way to kind of break into this kind of like Basque politics, into Catalonian politics, and develop like what you could aggressively call like compradors in these regions? Is that something viable, or do you feel like the way for them to win is to really heat up this kind of like culture war divide?
I mean, I think they're caught in a huge dilemma right now. I mean, their current leader is a very sort of uncharismatic, traditional, old school regional conservative who just, whose campaign was a shambles. So, I mean, part of it was just that, I think. But beyond that, there is an issue because they won, the combined vote of Vox and the PP was like 45.5% or something like that, which is 1% higher than what the PP got when they won their two absolute majority of seats. The Spanish electoral system isn't that. It's not that proportional. It's much more proportional in the US and the UK system, but not compared to, for example, the Irish system. And so it heavily favors the rural vote. And this was intentional. It's, it was designed, it's a pre-constitutional electoral system designed by, the final sort of government of after Franco died, but of his regime. And it heavily favors the rural vote, where the right tend to do well. And so on 45%, 45%, the PP have been able to win absolute majorities in the past. But because this vote has been now divided into two parties, it doesn't translate into the same number of seats. And so I think they are in a bit of a dilemma in the sense, do they continue in that line? And maybe if Sanchez has a short-lived second term, it's probably not going to go 4 years. maybe you don't get such a high turnout of the left vote the next time, and they win a majority, or do you go more towards the center? And I think the issue is if they go more towards the center, they potentially can win. Like there was about, I think they lost 500,000 votes from the center who basically stayed at home. Stayed at home. They were voters from the ex-liberal rightist Ciudadano party, and they decided not to. They chose not to vote, or else they were just on holidays and they didn't give a shit. But one or the other. And I think the issue is: do they go after that vote, or do they try and marginalize Vox on the right flank? And I think I have a feeling, given their sort of, the PP is very embedded in Madrid, in the Madrid media scene, which is very, very, has been sort of driving the sort of ideological polarization. I mean, even when we think about Vox is as much an expression of a sort of process of radicalization of the Spanish right, which was already underway, and then it sort of intensified that when it after its breakthrough. But you already had this very sort of aggressive, exclusionary form of Spanish nationalism being pushed by the PP and being pushed by Ciudadanos before Vox made its breakthrough. Vox have brought it to another level. I mean, there's a big difference. The sort of the very sort of old-fashioned essentialist, sort of neo-Francoist discourse of Vox and the PP. I mean, there is a big space, but obviously the other difference with Vox was Vox broke away. Vox comes from the PP. No, its leaders are all ex-PP officials or advisors, etc. So I think the PP have always positioned themselves as a sort of big tent right-wing party, which goes from the sort of liberal centre-right to the far right. Its founder, the ex-Francoist minister Manuel Fraga, said, behind me on the right is only the wall. So they want to go all the way to the far right, to the centre, and that's how they've been able to build parliamentary majorities with 44% of the vote. I think it's going to be much more difficult because Vox have, I think, quite a loyal voter base of about 10% that want an uncompromising, old school Spanish nationalism. And how do you marginalize them? Because the Spanish electoral system, if you get over 15%, there's no sort of your number of seats multiplies exponentially. Whereas if you're below 15%, you're basically being penalised, quite sharply as you go down. And Vox got 12%. It lost only 2.5% of its vote from 4 years ago, but it lost about half of its seats. And so, there wasn't a huge drop in Vox's vote, but there was in its seats, and that really cost the right. There would have been an absolute majority for the right otherwise. And so it is. I think the PP are in a huge dilemma. Do you tack right and compete with Vox, or do you try and go towards the centre?
Right. Fair enough. All right. So then, we're talking already about the two other parties that I need to talk about, but let's continue with Vox because we've brought them up. I'm going to keep calling them Vox. I can't do the Spanish VB sound. And when I hear people say what sounds like to me box, I get very confused. But Vox has always been kind of interesting to me in the sense of I remember the narratives of like, oh, the far right hasn't taken hold in Spain, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly, oops, there's an Andalusian local election and who's this hot new party on the scene? Yeah. But I'm very curious about two characters in this election, and have probably been around for a lot longer, I'm sure, which is Santiago Abascal and Jorge Buhade, if I'm doing that last name?
Buchete, yeah. Buchete.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a Catalan name, I think.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So they're kind of like, this is interesting to me, and I do actually. Sorry, I need to bring up the fifth party that I'm obsessed with, but disappeared for this election because we're talking about do you tack right and things like that, which is the C's, Ciudadanos, which the last thing I remember seeing from them online was like people doing local C's meetings in the like eating area of a McDonald's.
Yeah, McDonald's and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
What a precipitous drop!
Incredible. Yeah, really, really incredible. Within within the one term. I mean, it is incredible.
It's amazing, and it's a and one of the last like actual like political things I remember from them was them kind of opposing Catalonian language education in Catalonia. And I'm like, like the thing that always, and I guess this is the conundrum that we're talking about with PP. This felt like a Vox talking point. Like this seemed like, okay, if you're going to be like the liberal Spanish unity people, I feel like allowing other language education within your borders is the thing you kind of like give to the Catalonian separatists, the Basque separatists. But like that just seemed like such a weird issue to take a stance on, and I'm not sure if that's directly what led to their downfall. It just kind of seems like when presented with that, if I'm a Spanish like right wing person, I was like, well, I'm not going to vote for Diet Vox when Vox is on the menu, kind of thing. So,
well, I mean, I think that's exactly. I think that's basically what happened, wasn't it? That when you have Vox, why not have the authentic version with Vox, etc. But I mean, their downfall. I mean, I don't know. Like Ciudadanos, basically, it was a media construction. I mean, there was no real party before, party structure behind it. But there was two elections in 2019. In the first election, in April 2019, I think they got close to 20% of the vote. They had a potential option to go into coalition with the socialists in a sort of centrist government. But Ciudadanos at that point had already tacked far right. And I think that was the thing, was they were the sort of hinge party post the sort of indignados, anti-austerity protests. They were going to be the sort of the right-wing version of Podemos, the sort of new anti-corruption politics, neither right nor left, just sort of very fuzzy. So all their leaders were under 40 or whatever. And that changed with the independence push in 2017 in Catalonia and the referendum, etc. They realized that there was more space to the right of the PP than there was towards staying in the center, and so they, I mean, Ciudadanos itself and Vox. I mean, Ciudadanos was born as a unionist party in Catalonia, as a regional unionist party, and there was questions about whether, when the leadership of Vox broke away from the PP in, I think it was 2013, whether they would join maybe with Ciudadanos and stuff like that. I mean, it's all a very fluid space over there, because even with Vox, there was never. Vox comes from basically the neoconservative wing of the PP, and so you had figures that were close to the former prime minister, probably the most important Spanish politician in the last 30 years, Aznar. And they broke away from the PP when the Rajoy PP government refused to repeal abortion laws, which they'd promised, etc. But it was a very sort of fluid space at that moment where potentially Vox and Ciudadanos could have done a deal. After Podemos' breakthrough, Ciudadanos positioned themselves as a sort of centrist party, transversal centrist party. But then after 2017, tacked right. And when they tacked right, it had, you had a very, 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 very quick increases in the polls. I think at times they were above the PP.
Yes.
And in 2019, I think they were only a couple of points behind the PP in the first election. And their party leader at the time, Albert Rivera, chose instead of to go into government and become deputy prime minister, he chose second elections, believing he could overtake the PP and Ciudadanos would become the party of the right.
Right.
And that didn't happen, for various reasons, just because like its identity is so unclear. And then you have, I think Vox was able. You were mentioning the riots earlier. These were other riots, but the riots just before the November 2019 election to do with the sentencing of the Catalan leaders. Vox went in and played the law and order card and sort of, took a lot of that vote away from Ciudadanos.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's the thing, is that you have, I mean, it does seem that it's, for these sort of alternative right-wing parties, there is more space to the right of the PP than there is at the centre.
Right.
And that's obviously how Vox have sort of increased their vote share. But I guess the issue for Vox, the November 2019 election, they did very well. Let me see. I think they got what did they get? Well, they had 52 seats, and they went down to 33 this time. But they got 52 seats. It was a very specific moment of heightened regional conflict around the Catalan leaders' trial. You had riots in Barcelona, etc. Their issue is, if you don't have the territorial issue front and center in Spanish politics, how do you mobilize? And they've been trying. You brought up Jorge Buxade. It's like he's been trying. He led the Vox campaign. This time he's sort of the party's main ideologue. He comes from the sort of phalangist wing of the party. I mean, he literally was he was a phalangist candidate in his 20s. And so, whereas you would have a sort of just ultra conservative wing that wants a sort of more authentic version of the PP, Vox also has this more radical wing, which is openly sort of post-fascist. And I mean, he ran the Vox campaign because, I mean, Catalonia just wasn't that much of an issue. And then you had the question, I guess, of relationship of the current coalition with the Basques and Catalans. But he needed to differentiate himself from, or Vox needed to differentiate itself from the PP. And that was, its means of doing that was to first importing sort of alt-right conspiracy theories, and then second, sort of anti-feminist discourse, etc. But in a sense, it just didn't really, their campaign never really took off. It never really connected beyond its core voter. I guess they mobilized that sort of 10, 12% of the most radical right Spanish voter. But I think, unlike 2019, when you had sort of the backdrop of the Barcelona riots and they could play the law and order cards, at the end of the day, Spanish people don't care that much about immigration. The largest group of migrants that arrive in Spain irregularly come from Latin America. They speak Spanish and are Catholic. So, for better or for worse, like, it's just not, it's not, there isn't, it just doesn't mobilize people the way it does in Italy or France or whatever, and so sure. I think Vox did struggle in this election to make a breakthrough.
Yeah, I'm also kind of curious because I'm not too familiar with Buxade's strategy of one thing we've been seeing a little internationally, namely with the US, a little bit with France and the UK, is this kind of just be normal kind of strategy about the right, because they've tried doing the very online right-wing stuff, which I have seen bits of this in Spain. What was her name? Isabella Peralta or something like that. The woman who was at the Azul Legion March and then kind of tried to pivot that into an online alt-right kind of stardom thing. We see that a little bit with a character that we're obsessed with, much to Uma's chagrin on the show, which is Ada Yuk, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. She's kind of she's married to an alt-right character in the United States, but she's from Catalonia, and she posts a lot about if it was, one of the weird ones she did was if it wasn't for the Americans, everyone in Spain would be speaking German. And I was like, that's
wow, okay.
not how World War II struck out in your part. Very strange character, and still praises Franco and is trying to convince the Protestant Americans that Catholic Franco was good. Very interesting dynamics. But that kind of we're seeing in the US when people really tacked that kind of like alt-right online right-wing thing, it doesn't work. We see that also a bit with the UK with like really hammering on the transphobia, like really aggressively, and a very online way isn't working. A more subtle way is, unfortunately, but like not
Yeah.
the like, yeah. And
No,
I'm
I think
kind of
yeah, exactly. It is more that sort of subtle version. I mean, Maloney does it very well as well with the great replacement theory, etc. So, I mean, I guess in Vox, they're very, very focused on the UN development goal. So, Agenda 2030 is basically,
okay,
they describe as a new religion, a new form of
sure,
totalitarianism, and basically, yeah, new global governments being imposed. I mean, I guess, yeah, you have these two elements of sort of, the enemies within and the enemies without. The enemies within are trying to divide the nation. The enemies without are trying to, I guess, dilute Spain's sovereignty. And yeah, so one of the main external threats is the UN Agenda 2030, which is
mm.
always sort of framed in very not very subtle terms of sort of cosmopolitan New York elites. They don't the word Jewish is sort of implied somewhere in there, but it's
Yeah.
never quite said.
We say every word but Jewish,
Exactly,
basically.
yeah. I mean, and then the other, their other very similar sort of target is what they describe as the new Bauhaus, so the new EU Bauhaus, which is basically,
Okay.
I think what they're referring to is energy efficiency EU wide energy efficiency regulation, which they've interpreted into this like basically like all architecture around Europe will now be sort of this sort of
Right. So, yeah.
modernist, sort of without sort of traditional elements or whatever. I don't
Strange. Okay. Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So you do have all of this, but I mean that's the thing is I don't think there really is. I think the anti-feminism stuff works very well, like which is
Mm.
again basically a sort of form of anti-communism, and I think that stuff works. But I think acceptable maybe the hardcore far right, it doesn't resonate, and um, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the feminism stuff does, because again when you have like figures like Irene Montero, the Podemos deputy leader, etc. It is much more, it's just much more concrete, etc. Whereas I don't know, talking about sort of the new Bauhaus or the Agenda
Agenda
2030, it's just
2030.
it's all a bit abstract, and I don't think it really connects with sort of rural Spanish voters or whoever they're trying to like aim at. But
Yeah.
I guess that is the other issue is the farming element, and I think they are very interested at a regional level to get the farming portfolios, because they can use it to sort of create forms of ideological polarization around, I think it was in Castilla y Leon, they removed safety regulations around, I don't know, it was to do with cattle and stuff. And then basically the national government, because it was against EU regulations, the national government had to impose certain restrictions on cattle exports from that region. And so they are using those type of tactics as well. But yeah, the sort of conspiracy things, I would imagine they're going to rethink that a little bit, at least have that more in the background, because it didn't work in this campaign.
Yeah, that's fair. The farming one is super interesting because story that was interesting for people outside of Spain for a while, but then was I think became less of a topic because it's just too depressing, was the kind of like droughts and people talking about like, oh, there mightn't be any more olive oil or tomatoes in Europe because we decided Spain's going to do all of that. And that's like, that kind of topic. And I'm curious, it kind of sounds like they're trying to create like what you have in the Netherlands of these kind of like very aggressive farmer voters.
Yeah. And there have been, there's been a couple of incidents. There was basically where, I mean, I'm trying to think when it was, maybe about 6 weeks ago or something. Yeah, there was where farmer groups stormed the regional offices of the government there in retaliation for them restricting exports or whatever. Like there has been various, so they have managed to sort of create certain traction around that. The other issue in Spain, actually, which again this is actually an issue where you see across the sort of lines of the PP and Vox is a sort of moral scare around squatting. Squatting is a big issue in Spain, and
Right.
it's this was particularly big during the local elections. There was riot. It was I don't know if it was quite a riot, but there was problems in Barcelona where a sort of vigilante group tried to storm an occupied anarchist social
Right. These
center,
kind of spots.
etc.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I mean, but the discourse you have like very these type of social centers in abandoned buildings, which normally aren't residential buildings, but the discourse you get on right wing media is very much if you leave your home for a few weeks, you could come back and find squatters
Yeah.
inside, etc.
Absolutely.
And that has been quite effective as well. But yeah, it is interesting that immigration just really isn't on the radar in Spanish politics.
Okay. Then I guess this will be the last thing we talk about because I'm very conscious of time here. And the last major party that we need to talk about, there's a lot of parties in Spanish politics. It gets very fragmented, but the big one that we need to talk about is Sumar. Because this is a party that has existed for a couple of months, effectively.
Yeah.
Built around Yolanda Diaz, more or less, and built around a left unity, even between parties that had split. Like I'm namely thinking like Podemos and what was originally Mas Madrid, but is now Mas País, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm just kind of curious how they campaigned and any kind of speculation of what they're going to look like in the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because it's. I mean, how do you even describe it? Is it a party? I mean, it's sort of this sort of electoral platform, this sort of left unity platform, which has integrated 15 groups into this one platform, and yeah, I mean, I guess it goes back to when the Podemos founder and former Deputy Prime Minister Pablo Iglesias retired 2 years ago. He named Yolanda Diaz as his successor without informing her. So he posted a video on Twitter saying he was stepping down, that he was going to run in regional elections in Madrid, and then basically after that was going to retire from frontline politics. But he named Yolanda Diaz as his successor without informing her. She found out through the media, and I think their relationship had already been. I mean, they were quite close. In one sense, Iglesias had been her, before he founded Podemos, had been her advisor, etc. They had a long working relationship, but I think they had quite different styles. Maybe when they approached government as such, Iglesias pushed a line of what he described, and Podemos in general, of sort of trying to heighten the contradictions in the coalition, which with the limited sort of institutional weight that Podemos had, they could push policies in certain areas, but in most areas, no. And so in those type of areas, they would try and create, make sure that the differences were very obvious and public, that what they wanted as opposed to what the socialists wanted. But I think it didn't really work in the sense, firstly, the government was at the point of collapse 2 years ago because of these type of confrontations, but also because it may, for a lot of voters, it just was like, well, okay, that's what you want, but why are you in government? Like it made them look sort of a bit impotent, etc. That they couldn't, it was always framed in quite negative ways. Okay, we've pushed the socialists this far, but we couldn't get this, etc. And I think maybe they were trying to push battles on too many fronts, and it was just at a point where it wasn't going anywhere. Yolanda Diaz, when she took over, wanted basically greater distance from the Podemos leadership. She comes from a communist background. She's a rank and file communist member, and she's basically an MP. She was elected as an MP from a regional platforming that's allied to Podemos in Galicia, but didn't form a part of the Podemos leadership. And I think one of the calculations in Iglesias's decision to name her as his successor was that she didn't necessarily have a party structure behind her, and that she could be sort of an independent figurehead, but with very much dependent on Podemos. And I think Yolanda, basically what she wanted, she was very clear. She wanted political independence, political autonomy from Podemos, and so went around building this new platform for, in part, to gain this autonomy, and then also to gain, I guess, the explicit sort of objective was to create this sort of unity platform, bringing in these various factions which had broken away from Podemos at various points, and creating a new sort of balance of power within the left. And so it all came to a head basically after the local and regional elections, when Sanchez called the snap election, because Yolanda Díaz had been very clear she was going to wait until after Podemos suffered losses in the local elections to negotiate their incorporation into the platform,
right?
From a stronger negotiating position. And then after that, she was caught off guard by the fact that these snap elections were called, and she had, she then had 2 weeks in which to negotiate a unity deal between these various groups. They'd expected to have had all summer. The elections weren't scheduled for November, December. And so you had a 2-week negotiation process, which was very fractious, in which she basically imposed, she wanted the sort of old Pablistas, the old guard of Pablo Iglesias, removed from frontline politics, right, and the sort of renewal of the left's front bench. And she achieved that, but there was a lot of bad blood, etc. And I think because their result was decent, maybe not spectacular, but it was, when you look at the left elsewhere in Europe, it was a very decent result. They're particularly now they're looking to get, likely to be in government again. But they need, basically, there's going to be a sort of founding Congress in September, I think, where they're going to have a sort of formal, formalize it as a sort of party structure. But there's still, I think the current Podemos leader came out, was it like 12 hours after the election results, and criticized criticized Yolanda Díaz. There is still a lot of tensions. The Podemos leader, Yone Balada, didn't mention Yolanda Díaz once in all her campaign speeches, except for her very last speech on the last night of the campaign. But there were these sort of awkward speeches where Yolanda Díaz was on the stage just behind her. The Podemos leader would talk for 15 minutes, basically about Podemos' achievements in government, but not mention Yolanda. And so the tensions are still there. The Spanish left have been very divided. I mean, the fact that they're going to go into government again, I think, will mean the platform will, the tensions will remain within a certain sort of, we're not going to see further splits, I think, in the next couple of years, basically.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Right. This is all the time I have for the interview. I could probably go for a lot longer. Right. So where can people find your work and also your podcast?
Well, my podcast, Sobre Mesa Pod. We're on Twitter, etc. Available on all the major platforms. I write mainly for Jacobin and Tribune magazine, as well as other sort of progressive outlets, Novara. You can follow me on Twitter, basically, I think.
That's good. Yeah, no, we'll have links to all of that in the show description. And just want to say thank you, Eoghan, for coming on and explaining all of it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been good. Thanks. Cheers.
Well, what a great interview. What was your favorite part, Uma?
All of it.
All of it?
The very smart questions and the very smart answers.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And with those reviews, you should go back and listen to it again, because the only way you heard those reviews is by listening to it in the first place. All right. And with that has been your weekly Corner Späti. I want to once again thanks Eoghan for coming on and talking to us. And we will catch you on the bonus feed. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.